The broadcast began with a single flicker, a thin distortion that swept across every human outpost before the image snapped into clarity. In the center of the frame knelt a boy no older than 12, wrist bound, breath trembling in shallow bursts. His name, Iden, displayed briefly on a Dominion identification slate, vanished as quickly as it appeared. Watching from a dim command room aboard the carrier Resolute, Captain Mara Keene felt the air tighten around her. Iden had been a refugee rescued weeks earlier, a child who had clung to her uniform with the kind of desperate trust that left a mark. Now, that same child knelt alone before monsters who saw his life as nothing more than a warning. Beside Mara stood Commander Rylan Oren, her oldest friend and the steadiest officer humanity had ever trained. His jaw clenched as a Dominion soldier stepped behind Iden, armored boots ringing against metal flooring. "They know exactly what they're doing," he muttered, voice low, as if speaking too loudly might fracture fragile hope still hanging in the air. Mara didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on Iden's small form, on the faint bruise along his cheek, on the desperate resolve flickering behind his fear. Every second pressed heavier on her chest, a countdown towards something she refused to accept. Iden had spoken little since arriving on the Resolute, but what he did share lingered with Mara. Memories of losing his parents to a Dominion raid, of wandering debris fields looking for scraps of food, of hiding whenever soldiers passed overhead. He had survived through instinct alone, carrying trauma no child should know. Mara had promised him protection, not as a captain offering sanctuary, but as a human unwilling to let the galaxy devour another innocent. That promise now twisted like a blade in her ribs, each second the broadcast deepening the wound. The Dominion officer leaned closer to the camera, his voice resonant with calculated menace. "Humanity continues to trespass," he declared, gesturing to the trembling child. "This is a cost of defiance." His words rang through the Resolute's command deck, each syllable striking like a blow. Rylan exhaled sharply, fists curling at his sides. Around them, crew members froze, eyes cemented to the unfolding horror. Even the hum of machinery felt muted, as if the ship itself recoiled from what it witnessed. Iden glanced toward the lens, and for a heartbeat Mara imagined he was looking directly at her. There was no plea in his gaze, only a quiet question, one she could not answer. The Dominion soldier drew a plasma blade, its violet edge bleeding light across the room. Mara felt her pulse quicken, each beat painful, each second tightening the inevitable. She reached for the console, instinctively searching for something, anything, to intervene, though she knew there was no signal to disrupt, no code to break, no miracle to summon. Rylan stepped closer, his voice barely audible. "If they do this, Mara, everything changes." She nodded once, jaw set. The Dominion had crossed boundaries before, but never like this. Never with a deliberate intent to broadcast the execution of a child humanity had sworn to protect. This act was not a message. It was a declaration, deliberate and unforgivable, meant to break the spirit of every human who dared stand against them. The strike, when it came, was swift. A flash, a cry cut brutally short, and the screen collapsed into darkness. Silence swept through the Resolute's command deck, heavy, stifling, suffocating. Mara stood motionless, her breath caught somewhere between grief and fury. Rylan bowed his head, eyes burning with the same emotion that churned inside her. Around them, no one spoke. There were no words capable of holding the weight of what they had witnessed. Mara reached out and placed a steady hand on the console, grounding herself as the pain settled into something sharper, more focused. Iden had trusted her. She had failed him. But failure did not extinguish responsibility. It rekindled it. Across the ship, whispers began to rise, crew members murmuring vows of retribution, their grief hardening into resolve. Rylan lifted his gaze, meeting hers with silent question. "What now?" Mara inhaled slowly, letting the moment crystallize into certainty. She straightened her shoulders and spoke with calm, unwavering clarity. "This ends today," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried through every corner of the command deck, steady as a battle drum. The crew froze, absorbing the meaning behind her words. The path ahead was inevitable, the turning point already set in motion. She closed her eyes briefly, honoring the boy whose life had sparked a reckoning, then turned toward her crew. In that silence, every soldier understood what her next command would ignite. Humanity had been wounded, but not broken, and the fire they carried would reshape the fate of the galaxy. The Resolute moved through the void with a predatory stillness, its engines humming a restrained frequency that matched the tension gripping everyone aboard. After Iden's execution, Captain Mara Keen had summoned her senior officers into the strategy chamber, where dim lights cast long shadows across their faces. Every expression mirrored the same consuming fury, but Mara's remained controlled, refined into a blade. She stood at the central hollow table, its projection displaying the Dominion sector responsible for the broadcast. The map flickered with data, troop deployments, and shield networks, each detail feeding the storm gathering inside her. Commander Rylan Oren lingered opposite her, his stance rigid. He had always been the type to seek diplomacy before destruction, but even he felt the gravity of what lay ahead. "We go in blind if we move now," he warned. "Their defenses are layered, and we don't know how many settlements they converted into hosting stations." Mara studied him, recognizing the conflict in his voice. He feared reckless action, yet feared inaction even more. She had always trusted his judgment, but today, trust meant something different. Today, trust required decisiveness, not hesitation. Lieutenant Hale, the youngest officer present, stepped forward with a tremor in her voice that carried more determination than fear. "Captain, morale across the fleet is collapsing. If we don't respond, we risk losing the confidence of every human system. People watch the child die on their screens. They're demanding a retaliation worthy of what was taken." Her hands were clenched, knuckles pale from emotion she barely contained. Mara saw herself in Hale, sharp, compassionate, and still young enough to believe every tragedy must be answered with swift justice. But justice, Mara knew, required clarity. She activated a sequence on the holotable, revealing a single Dominion command world, Verican, a fortress planet, the birthplace of the broadcast, the core of their brutality. As its outline hovered between them, Mara spoke with precision. "We are not launching a war across every Dominion territory. We target the source. Verican houses the general responsible, and dismantling that command structure will fracture their reach. This is not vengeance. This is strategic reprisal." She glanced at Rylan, waiting for the tension in his features to settle into alignment. When he gave a slow nod, she felt the first thread of unity return to her team. The chamber vibrated faintly as the ship adjusted orientation, preparing for the course override she had authorized moments earlier. Outside, dozens of human vessels mirrored the maneuver, each pilot sharpened by grief and expectation. Mara addressed them through the comm line, her voice echoing across every deck. "We move not out of hatred, but resolve. A child trusted us with his life, and that trust was broken by those who believe power grants them impunity. Today, we show them the truth. The silence that followed was the kind that anchored soldiers, binding them into a shared mission that transcended fear." Rylan stepped beside her once more as the comm line faded. "This will change us," he murmured. Mara turned slightly, acknowledging the truth in his words. "We were already changed," she replied. "Iden's death didn't create something new. It uncovered what we carried all along." He absorbed her response, shoulders lowering as understanding tempered his earlier apprehension. He had always grounded her, but he also knew when to let her lead without restraint. In that moment, their partnership solidified into the resolve the fleet desperately needed. As they approached the hyperspace threshold, alarms signaled their entrance into Dominion border surveillance. Hale transmitted encrypted pulses to scramble local sensors, and the ship dimmed lights automatically to combat detection. Mara observed the transition not as a tactical shift, but as a symbolic one. Once they crossed the threshold, there was no possibility of retreat. Humanity would step fully into a confrontation they had avoided for decades, and the galaxy would witness the extent of their unity. She inhaled slowly, centering herself for the impact that awaited them. When hyperspace ruptured around the Resolute, the fleet plunged toward Verican's orbit with calculated precision. Dominion patrol ships scattered in confusion, unprepared for a coordinated strike that defied their assumptions about human disorganization. Mara issued orders as the first wave of resistance unfolded. Ryland commanded the flanking vessels, directing fire with an intensity that contrasted his earlier reservations. Hale supported ground deployment, her voice steady as she relayed tactical updates. Mara watched her officers transform grief into discipline, rage into purpose, vulnerability into power. As Verikan's shields flickered under the assault, the fleet began preparing for surface descent. Mara paused at the viewport, observing the planet's harsh terrain, its metallic cities gleaming beneath defensive artillery. Somewhere down there resided the architects of Iden's suffering. Somewhere down there waited the answers humanity deserved. She placed a hand against the cold glass, not for comfort, but for conviction. "We end what they started," she whispered. And with that, the fleet descended toward the world where justice would be demanded and debts would finally be paid. The Resolute pierced Verikan's atmosphere with a shudder that rattled through every bolt of its frame. Flames licked across the hull as the ship pushed downward, guided by Mara's unwavering determination. She stood anchored at the command platform, gaze locked on projection of the landing zone, a fortified plaza at the base of the Dominion's central tower. The structure rose like a spear of obsidian, a monument to oppression, and the birthplace of the broadcast that had shattered the galaxy's fragile stability. Everything they had endured since that moment guided them toward this single descent. Commander Ryland Oren secured his harness beside her, his voice steady despite the turbulence. "Extraction teams are in position. Once we establish ground control, we move straight for the command nucleus." His tone carried no doubt, only the cold efficiency forged from the grief that had carved itself into him. He was no longer the officer who hesitated in the strategy chamber. He had evolved into the counterpart she needed, disciplined, focused, unflinching. Mara offered a brief nod, recognizing how deeply the mission had reshaped him. Lieutenant Hale transmitted updated troop movements, her fingers dancing across the hollow console with a fluid confidence. "Resistance is escalating around the plaza," she reported. "Dominion forces are mobilizing heavy units, but their coordination is fractured. They weren't prepared for a direct planetary assault." There was a spark of pride in her voice, subtle but unmistakably human. She had grown in the crucible of this mission, finding her courage not in rank but in conviction. The loss of Iden had hardened her resolve, yet there remained a gentleness in her expression when she thought no one noticed. Mara admired that balance. As the ship landed with a jarring thud, the bay doors opened to a flood of heat, smoke, and shrapnel-filled wind. Human soldiers surged outward, weapons raised, moving with synchronized precision across the fractured terrain. The plaza had erupted in streaks of plasma as Dominion gunners unleashed suppressive fire from elevated platforms. Mara advanced with her strike team, her boots crunching against charred stone. Every step deepened her focus, narrowing her awareness to the singular purpose that guided them. Ryland moved at her side, shielding her flank with practiced reflex. "Their main cannon is powering up," he warned, glancing at the tower's glowing aperture. Mara swept her weapon upward, firing bursts that shattered defensive panels. "Keep pressure on them," she ordered, voice sharp as a blade. "We can't let them lock onto the fleet." Her soldiers responded immediately, sweeping through waves of resistance with relentless force. They weren't driven by rage alone. They were driven by memory. Every Dominion soldier who felt echoed the moment Iden's life had been stolen. Explosions thundered across the plaza as human forces pushed forward. Hale coordinated aerial support, guiding dropships into tactical positions with pinpoint accuracy. Mara spotted her through the haze, kneeling behind a barricade as she relayed instructions to pilots roaring overhead. Hale's bravery was no longer quiet. It was visible, formidable, born from the fire of responsibility she refused to shrink beneath. As the final barricade collapsed, Mara's team reached the base of the tower, its doors sealed with a resonant clang, locks glowing bright red. Ryland approached the security panel, scanning it with a skeptical frown. "They've installed a biokey system. Only high-ranking Dominion officers can open it." Mara raised her rifle and fired a precise shot that fried the keypad, but the door remained unmoved. She exhaled slowly, refusing frustration. "We don't need permission," she said. "We need leverage." A Dominion officer, wounded but alive, stumbled from behind a column, reaching for his fallen weapon. Ryland incapacitated him with a swift kick, then hauled him upright. The officer trembled, realizing exactly what they wanted. Mara stepped close, her voice calm yet piercing. "Open the door." The officer hesitated, eyes darting wildly, until Mara added, "The alternative ends here." Her tone carried no threat, only certainty. The officer's resolve cracked. With shaking hands, he pressed his palm against the biometric panel. The doors parted with a heavy groan. Inside, the tower's cold corridor stretched upward like the veins of a dying beast. Human soldiers swept through with discipline, securing each level as Mara, Rylan, and Hale ascended toward the command nucleus. The air grew colder, the lights dimmer, the silence heavier. Everything in the structure felt engineered to intimidate, to enforce the Dominion's illusion of invulnerability. When they reached the central chamber, its steel doors slid open to reveal the man at its heart, General Solaris Vecker, architect of the broadcast. He stood tall, armor polished, expression composed despite the chaos tearing his empire apart. "So humanity finally arrives," he said, voice smooth, almost mocking. "All this destruction for one insignificant child." Mara stepped forward, her stare unblinking. "No child is insignificant," she replied. "But you already knew that." Her voice, controlled and deliberate, silenced the chamber. Vecker reached for his sidearm, but Rylan was faster, disarming him with a single strike. Hale secured the exits, her movement swift and assured. Vecker straightened, refusing to show fear. "You believe killing me will restore balance?" "No," Mara answered, "but stopping you will." She advanced, purpose radiating through every step. "Your reign ends now." And as the chamber's alarms wailed and Verican trembled under the weight of humanity's advance, Mara realized the final confrontation had begun. But the story of what came next was still unwritten, waiting to be claimed.